I've seen a lot of press about Copilot, which is the new Microsoft capability. Could you share a bit more about Copilot?
I can ask you just to summarize where I've been mentioned, what actions are for me, to give me a feel for the sentiment of the meeting, who were the main talkers, actually what were the key themes that were discussed.
From the city of Peaky Blinders, Birmingham, England, I would like to introduce you to Paddy Danda.
As the world becomes more automated and the robots take over, it's imperative that we build the right human skills for the future. So pull up a chair, grab a samosa or two, and make yourself very uncomfortable.
Okay, Paul, what's the superpower that you'd like to talk about today?
Hey, Paddy. So I think today I'd like to talk about learning and skilling, and I guess from an organizational point of view, maybe hinting at the culture that can support a spirit of learning.
Oh, I love that. And we were just talking before we kicked off how I often say on this podcast, knowledge is power, but learning is a superpower. So I think this is a really pertinent topic for the podcast. And I know you're doing some really good stuff at Microsoft from a learning perspective. How did you get into that? Like, what's been your journey in terms of how you've ended up where you have now?
So I guess I have what is known as a very squiggly career. So the bulk of my background is actually in recruitment. I spent 17, 18 years as a technology recruiter. And I think that was really important because I've had tens of thousands of conversations with individuals around actually, well, what's important to you? Why are you looking to move from your current role? What's important to you for your next job? And the vast majority of those people that answered that question came back with, it's about learning something new. It's about not being able to move forward. It's about not being able to learn and grow. It was very rarely about money. Now, that may have changed a little bit, I think, given the world that we live in today. But I think that fundamentally, people have this yearning to be valued, to be recognized, to be able to learn, and to be a better version of themselves. And I effectively came into Microsoft as a recruiter, selling the Microsoft dream, and thought to myself, you know what? I wouldn't mind a part of this myself. And effectively moved internally from a recruiter position into another role. Stayed there for about 2.5 years, and then moved into the position that I'm in today. That role I've been doing for 4.5 years or so now. I'm the UK public sector skills lead. So I work with our public sector customers predominantly to make sure that they can get as much value as possible from their investment in Microsoft through the medium of skilling. And I work with a great team where we have an industry alignment covering all of those other industry sectors.
Oh, amazing. And innovation is accelerating at a phenomenal pace with AI and all of these good things that are out there. From your perspective, what are you seeing in terms of that acceleration at the moment? I know Microsoft have recently launched Copilot, the AI features in Microsoft Office. But what are you seeing in terms of the pace of change at the moment?
The pace of change, I think, is only accelerating. If we rewind to, and in many ways, for me at least, it seems like a distant memory, COVID, I guess. And as a country, we moved from the 9 till 5, getting on a bus or a train or getting into your car, commuting to the office, to this immediate pivot to remote working and using digital tools. And we saw a massive amount of digital transformation in a very short period of time. And I think from a digital transformation point of view, that was a real accelerator and a real enabler. And I don't think that pace of change has really abated since. There are lots of great things that are happening with things like Microsoft Copilot and just generative AI generally. But who would have even thought we would have been talking about this 12, 15, 18 months ago? And it's really redefining even just core digital skills. I think arguably everybody needs to understand how to use an app, whatever that app is, whether it's a banking app, whether it's something like Facebook or what have you. And actually, the ability to understand what AI is now becoming a core digital skill. And in many ways, it will help us bridge that digital divide. Because I think if we rewind prior to things like Copilot, in many ways, someone who was using tooling was limited by their knowledge of that tooling. I need to go into this menu. I need to go into that menu. I need to select this option to do this, whatever it might be. And we're very quickly getting to a point where people are now limited by their imagination rather than their knowledge of a specific tool. So I think we're seeing an accelerating period of change, but in a really positive way that is really democratizing IT for all and really putting that power in everyone's fingers. All hands.
I was at a presentation that you gave recently, and some of the stats were pretty interesting that you shared. I've got them here, actually. I was just going to read some of them out because I think it'd be really interesting for listeners. So you talked about the number of apps that will be created in the next 5 years, and that was something like 500 million. That's more than the last 40 years combined, just to put that into perspective. That's massive. And then you also talked about how the job market's changing and the fact that 85% of tech jobs that will exist in 2030 haven't yet been created. Could you share some insights on that in terms of those jobs? What are you seeing in terms of that future? Is it all going to be AI driven, or is there going to be other important jobs that people will still need to maintain some of those human skills that they have today that will be really important?
So I think it's really interesting. When I first looked at that slide that called out that stat, I really struggled to believe it. But then when you start to pick it apart a little bit, and if you rewind 15, 20 years and you think about the jobs that existed then that maybe don't exist today, or indeed the jobs that exist today that weren't on anyone's radar then, it becomes a bit more understandable or a bit more believable. We go back a little bit further. Think about those video store managers. We all know the blockbuster Netflix story. If you think about lift operators, if you think about, I'm going slightly further back now, I guess, those typing pools, where has all that gone? If you think about how AutoCAD revolutionized that particular industry, there is constant change, which is seeing the creation of new jobs. Who would have thought 15, 20 years ago that we would have cloud engineers? You talk to anyone about the cloud maybe around that time, they would have just looked up into the sky. And here we are now looking at the cloud as really an enabler and an accelerator for all businesses. And with all businesses arguably now becoming software businesses in terms of the tooling that they use, that's front and center for a lot of people. Who would have thought that would have been a thing? Now, influencers. Now, I've got to say, and I'm sorry for any influencers that are listening, I really don't get that. Maybe that's just me. But who would have thought that 15 years ago that you could have launched a very successful and credible career as an influencer? And then we think about autonomous vehicles. If we think about, say, self-driving cars and people that are developing systems for those, we're on the cusp of commercial flights and those engineers that are supporting that. And then you think about generative AI, and then you think about prompt engineering, and then you think about trainers to train these large language models and all the other stuff that is on the cusp of being created. And all of a sudden becomes really believable. And of course, the thing is that we don't really know what that future holds. Who would have thought, I said earlier, that 15 months ago, we would have been talking so broadly and so enthusiastically about AI. And it's really difficult to predict as a result of that what the next 12 months will look like, even the next 6 months, I think. But I think what it does do, though, and if we think about AI, is that it enables us as individuals to focus on the work that makes that uniquely human. We should think about AI almost as an assistant. We should think about AI almost as that hungry intern that wants to help and wants to support, that can do a lot of the mundane, repetitive work. So you can focus on the job of being creative, of bringing yourself to your role. And as a result of that, I think many roles will evolve, many careers will evolve. in slightly different ways, in ways that we can't foresee. But I think it's very exciting as a result of that. So I'm sure there's lots of new jobs that are on the horizon. We don't know what those are going to look like yet. And I think if you look back over the last 12 months, that's all the evidence you need to support that statement. I think we're living in very exciting times. And I think from a skilling lens, I think the key here is to embrace that as an opportunity, not as a threat, and to be curious and to explore and to understand how you can learn, how you can innovate as a result of these new tools, how you can bring these and drive that learning to drive impact within your respective organizations, and really use this technology wave to your and your organization's benefit. Sorry, Paddy, that was a really long answer.
No, I think it really hit the mark, because one of the things, again, I saw in your presentation, I love this quote from Satya Nadella, which was, we're moving from a group of people who know it all to a group of people who want to learn it all. And I think that for me is super important, because traditionally we've been told, like, learn a skill and get really good at that one skill. And I think we're in a world at the moment where, well, tomorrow that skill might not be as important. So it's that curiosity that you mentioned, really having that sense of trying your hand at different things and knowing at least a little bit about everything, so that you can at least then make some informed decisions about if you want to go this way or that way. And I think that's super important. And learning is becoming really important, isn't it, for us as individuals? Because I remember when I left university, I pretty much told myself I'm never going to do another training course ever again, because I was sick and tired of that whole academic experience of sitting exams and studying. And I just assumed I'm going to go into the world of work and not have to study ever again. And how wrong was I? Because the world we live in at the moment requires that constant learning. So you're very passionate about building a learning culture. So if somebody out there is in that situation where they do want to learn, they want to start to really make that into more of a habit, like, what are some of the things that they can do? What are some of the ways in which you build that learning culture?
So I think there's two ways of looking at this. If we look at it through the lens of an individual, and we look at this through the lens of an organization, because there is almost that sort of learning contract between the two, in terms of an organization saying, okay, we really understand the importance of everybody learning. We want that learning tool culture, and we will give you time to do that. And we will give you the resources to do that. But actually, this contract is two-way, and it also then requires the learner to say, well, that's great. I want to do this, and I will use the time that you're giving me for learning to actually do learning, and not to catch up on my expenses reports or to do my online shopping or whatever it might be. So both parties have shared responsibility for sort of making it happen. From an organizational point of view, it's really important to recognize that a couple of things, I think. First of all, that learning isn't just about going on a course. Actually, that formal learning, for many that look at maybe that traditional 70-20 sort of 10 model, is a smaller part of it. Is recognizing that learning can happen at any point during the day. You can learn, you can share information. That is learning. You can show a colleague how to do something. That is learning. You post something that shows people or shows a community how to do something. That is learning. And actually, from Microsoft's point of view, we recognize that 70% of the learning that we do is that way, is very much on the job, experiential learning. Do that, you need to have time and space to be curious, and you need to be able to experiment a little bit and not worry about getting things wrong. Because as long as you learn from that, then that's okay. And I think as an employer, it's important to give learners permission to learn, but also space to learn as well. Learning isn't something that is given to somebody as a reward. As we're seeing digital transformation and an acceleration in the use of IT and the evolution of those products, actually learning is part of everybody's role. It's a fundamental part of everybody's role, and it should be built into the typical day as a result of that. So individuals should be encouraged to prioritize learning, in many cases, over and above business, the delivery of business projects where appropriate. Of course, it's not always appropriate, but as an organization, if you're carving out a couple of hours of learning time every Friday, for example, and a learner has that time, and then somebody puts in a business meeting in that learning time, actually, how many of those individuals are comfortable declining that meeting and saying, no, this is my learning time? And how many people aren't? And I think getting to the point culturally where you can support that, where you can reward learning, or more importantly, the impact that you can get from that learning, I think is really important. And I think as individuals, if we can learn something, we can apply those skills in the workplace, we can then demonstrate the impact that we're having, whatever that might be, as a result of that learning, then that is what we should be rewarding. And those rewards as an organization, they don't have to be financial. I mean, that's always shaded, I guess. Actually, feeling valued, feeling recognized for the work that you are doing, the contribution that you are making, the change that you are driving, I think is sometimes just the recognition, the reward that people need. And then I think from an individual's point of view, is very much recognizing that if your employer is giving you that time and space to learn, that actually you should do that you should invest that time in learning. And sometimes it's not just about learning the stuff that you need to do your job today. It's actually pushing that boundary, from sort of that curious spark that hopefully is ignited in you to understand actually what tools, what innovations are out there that you could explore, that you could bring in to the workplace, to help your employer innovate. Very much a two-way street, but foundationally, I think employers giving individuals time, space, resource, and permission to learn is really, really important.
I've seen a lot of press about Copilot, which is the new Microsoft capability that you built into a lot of the Microsoft tools. Could you share a bit more about Copilot? Like, what is it? If someone out there hasn't come across it and is wondering, well, how's this going to help me? Could you share a few insights about what it is and how we can use it?
Copilot, I guess at a very, very basic level, is that natural language assistant that can support you in your role. Now, there are different Copilots for different Microsoft products. But if we focus sort of beyond, for example, Copilot for Microsoft 365 that will be embedded across tools such as Microsoft Teams, Word, Microsoft Outlook, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. There's a myriad of different uses for it. But if I maybe the easiest way to do this, I think, is maybe if I just give you some examples of how I use it. We all have back-to-back meetings sometimes, and we sometimes join meetings late, or we have a clash and we have to come in. Actually, the beauty of Copilot is, I can open a Copilot, I can ask it to recap the meeting so far. What have I missed? Actually, tell me who have been the main speakers and what actions have been assigned to me, which is a great way of me getting up to speed really quickly. Or if I actually have to watch a meeting that's been recorded because I've had a clash, I no longer have to sit through 30 or 60 minutes worth of recording. I can ask it just to summarize where I've been mentioned, what actions are for me, to give me a feel for the sentiment of the meeting, who were the main talkers, actually what were the key themes that were discussed. And it will give me all of this information. So it enables me to focus on understanding what's important to me and getting on with my role without having to be burdened by the catch-ups and the admins. I join many meetings with my customers where we talk about learning opportunities and learning resources and their challenges. And typically at the end of that, I have to write a summary email that recaps that conversation and signposts resources and highlights actions. Actually, now I don't have to do that. I can ask Copilot to write meeting notes or to recap the meeting, and I can ask it to format that into a table in terms of key speakers and themes and action points. And within seconds, I have a summary that I can copy and paste into an email. I can check for accuracy. Obviously important to check for accuracy for everything that you do with Copilot. And assuming that it is okay, I can then send that out to that email thread. And that saves me a massive amount of time. How many times do we have to summarize meetings as individuals? And if you no longer had to do that, how much time would that save you? One of the other things that I do is write articles. I'll write blog posts. I will think about writing marketing material. And I'm sitting there with an open Word document and I've got writer's block and I have no idea what to say. Well, actually, I can now ask Copilot to suggest something. I can write a prompt. So I'm looking to write this. This is what I need to include. These are the themes that I need to convey. This is the audience that I'm looking at. And write me a document. Now, that may not be right, and invariably it does require tweaking, but it gives me a great foundation from which to start and actually does 50, 60, 70% of the work for me. I've been asked to prepare a PowerPoint presentation for a meeting based on a document or based on previous conversations or email threads that we've had. I can now use Copilot to analyze those documents and prepare a PowerPoint presentation with speaker notes for me, removing the need for me to do that legwork. And if you're anything like me, it takes me forever to build PowerPoint decks. Now, are these perfect? No, but actually they get me off the ground. They get me out of the gates. So I fine tune and finesse, and it makes a massive difference. From a productivity point of view, I'm far more productive because I can use these. Even if we extend that further into things like Excel or into Power BI, I'm no one's data analyst by any measure, I've got to say, but actually being able to turn around to Copilot in Power BI and say, I need to get this answer. Please write me the DAX formula to actually analyze and pull this out is a great time saver, because now all I need to understand is the output. What do I want to achieve? I don't need to understand how to do it. And I think Copilot is, if you look at it through that lens, you can start to imagine how it can really empower you, to be a lot more productive and to remove some of that drudgery. And as my comment at the beginning, really enables you to focus on the work that makes our roles uniquely human. With a caveat, look at Copilot very much as an intern, I guess. It's a co-pilot, which suggests that there is a pilot. You are always the pilot. You should always check the outputs for accuracy. You would never take content from an enthusiastic, but let's say relatively inexperienced intern and just push it out to your stakeholders without sense checking that content. So please never do that with Copilot. You should always check this content for accuracy. And Microsoft does a great job, I think, of reminding people about that at every step of the way. But as long as you look at it through that lens, I think it's a really powerful and transformational tool for everybody.
I was going to say, I'm the worst at Excel. I remember when I was in the office, call over one of my friends who's a whiz with all the formulas and everything. So in a way, I can see this as being a super powerful way of getting some of the basic stuff. Like, I'm rubbish with pivot tables and things like that. And I can just see being able to create a prompt and just explaining what I want done. And for the system to do that for me is super, super useful. And in terms of the features that have been launched within those Microsoft apps, is this like the biggest by far, do you think, that you've come across? Just to put it into perspective.
So my own, and this is just my personal opinion, I think it's the most transformational. If I think about Microsoft 365, if I think about how it almost democratizes the power within Microsoft 365 for everybody, regardless of their level of digital skill or digital confidence, I think it has the ability to be really transformational. The way that it's the power of your imagination. You're no longer constrained by knowing how to do something. You just need to know what it is that you want to get out of it. And I think that's the power. So yes, I think it broadly speaking is.
I was watching a recent video from one of your Microsoft colleagues, and she was explaining Copilot. And one of the statements really resonated with me was the typical user of the Microsoft apps uses probably about 15% of the features. And now Copilot allows us to unlock those other 85%, which is great, because I've seen some people do some real magic with like PowerPoint and things like this. And I've often wondered, how are they doing that? And they're obviously tapping into that other 85% of features that we probably never get to play with. So I am super excited and to really unleash that power of the tools, which is great. Now, I know at Microsoft, you've got some really good support and help for people if they want to learn more about Copilot. What are some of the ways that people could do some of that learning by themselves?
I think one of the easiest ways is just to experiment, is just to play. The beautiful thing about, I think, modern tooling is that it's really difficult to break. It's amazing how many things can be fixed by just turning things off and on again, for example. If you go into sort of Bing as a browser, for example, Copilot functionality is already embedded within that. So you don't even need to have access to Microsoft 365 to be able to experience how Copilot can help you. Yes, it's there if you have that sort of license, but if you want to experience it outside of that, then going into Bing and using the Copilot functionality there will really help you understand the power of that and start practicing sort of your prompts. And in fact, there is a Microsoft Learn learning module that walks you through and gives you some training on how to use that. And maybe if there's a way for me to put that link into this, Paddy, so you can surface it sort of as part of the podcast, I think that would be good because it's free content. And as long as you have a web browser and internet connection, that's all you need. So for anyone that's curious about understanding how Copilot can help you, I think that would be a great link to share. And there are more. There's a massive library and a growing library of generative AI content available from Microsoft, whether that's using one of our Copilots, whether that is exploring the Azure OpenAI service, or sort of that wider sort of AI landscape. We talk about AI today, and I think we generally are talking about generative AI. But actually, we should remember that sort of AI has been with us for quite a while. You know, there are other components of this, you know, computer vision and text to speech. And there is an even wider catalog of free training and learning available from Microsoft, for example, that everybody can tap into.
Oh, brilliant. We'll definitely share that link in the show notes so people can get access to that learning. So time's flying by. I wanted to end the show with one of my fun questions for you. If I could give you any superpower in the world to abolish something in the world of work for 24 hours, what would that be?
Now, this might be a bit dangerous, but I would like to abolish the word no, because I think obviously there would need to be some sort of common sense sort of constraints around that, I guess. But I think a lot of innovation is sometimes stifled by fear of the unknown or being wary. And I think the inability to say no for a short period of time would give people permission to be maybe a little bit braver than they are at this moment in time, just to push things a little bit more. And I think with the right controls, you could see some real goodness come of that, you know, being maybe a little bit more curious and for being a little bit more brave, knowing that someone can't say no.
I love that. And there's a great technique whereby try to avoid the word no, especially when you're building upon someone's idea or using the word but, and instead saying yes and that's a nice way of really kind of embracing someone's idea and then building upon that. So I love that. Okay, we're going to try it. No more no's for the next 24 hours. Let's see how we do.
Good luck with that. But I think that would be a great aspiration to have, I think.
Oh, perfect. Well, Paul, I really want to thank you for your time. I know you're a very busy man. I really appreciate you taking time out today to speak to us. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks, Paddy.
It's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please do connect with me via LinkedIn and drop me a message and let me know your favorite takeaways from the episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Superpower School newsletter so that you can be notified of all future episodes. Simply visit the website www.superpowers.school. Thank you once again.